This section is intended to give you the basic knowledge of neural networks that is necessary to understand the advanced techniques of deep learning and machine learning. Neural networks are networks of nerve cells in the brain of humans and animals. The human brain has about 10 to 100 billion nerve cells, and we owe our intelligence and the ability to adapt to variable environment conditions to their complex interconnections and adaptivity. In addition to the cell body, the neuron has an axon which can establish local connections to other neurons in the brain via the dendrites. The axon can also be a nerve fiber that runs through the body up to about 1 meter long. The cell body of the neuron is a storage for small electrical voltages comparable to a capacitor or battery. This memory is charged by incoming voltage pulses from other neurons. The more voltage pulses arrive, the higher the voltage becomes. If the voltage exceeds a certain threshold, the neuron fires. This means it discharges its memory by not sending voltage pulses, also called spikes, through the axon and synapses. The current splits and eventually reaches many other neurons via the synapses where the same process takes place. So how do we get from biological neural networks to technical ones? Through the most radical simplification. An artificial neural network consists of a set of very simple and highly interconnected processors, which are also called neurons. They model the biological neuron in the brain. The neurons are interconnected by weighted connections that transmit the signals from one neuron to another. A neuron that can process any number of input signals, but it always outputs only one output signal, which, as shown in the figure, can, however, propagate in different directions. How can an artificial neural network learn? The neurons are interconnected by weighted connections. The numerical values of the weighted connections can be changed and are intended to simulate human long-term memory. They express the importance of the connection. The more often the connection is used, the more often its weight changes and thus the assigned meanings of the signal. In the human brain, the synapse takes over this task. Learning, therefore, means the repeated adaptation of the weights of the connections in a neural network. There are many different architectures for neural networks. In the following section, we will learn about the different topologies, architectures for deep learning and machine learning. In this section, however, we will limit ourselves to the basic signal processing of a neuron. The following figure shows a simplified schematic representation of signal processing in a neuron. A neuron receives signals from its input connections and calculates a new threshold value and sends it as an output signal via the output application. The output signal of this neuron can either be the last signal in this network, which solves the problem, or it can be the input signal for other neurons. A neuron calculates its initial value according to the idea of McCulloch and Pitts. For this purpose, a sum of the weighted input signals is formed and compared with a certain threshold value, also called theta. If the calculated value is smaller than the threshold value, the neuron outputs -1 in the simplest case. If it is greater than or equal to the threshold value, the output is 1. This decision is made by the so-called activation function. In this case, it is the signum function. However, there are several that control the output behavior of the neuron linearly or non-linearly. The perceptron is a simplified artificial neural network first introduced by Rosenblatt in 1958. The basic version consists of a single artificial neuron with adjustable weights and a threshold value and is thus based on McCulloch and Pitts models. Today, the term perceptron refers to various combinations of the original model. A distinction is made between single-layer and multi-layer perceptrons. In the single-layer perceptron, there is only one single layer of artificial neurons, which also represents the output vector. Each neuron is represented by a neuron function and receives the entire input vector as parameter. The processing is very similar to the so-called Hebbian learning rule for natural neurons. Since the Hebbian learning rule refers to the weighting of each input value, learning a perceptron is done by adjusting the weights of each neuron. Once the weights are learned, a perceptron is also able to classify input vectors that differ slightly from the original learned vector. Rosenblatt showed that a simple perceptron with two input values and a single output value can be used to represent the simple logical operators AND, OR, and NOT. However, Minsky proved in 1969 that a single-layer perceptron cannot resolve the XOR operator. This led to a standstill in research on artificial neural networks. The limitation of the single-layer perceptron could later be solved with a multi-layer perceptron, in which there is at least one additional layer of hidden neurons in addition to the output layer, also called the hidden layer. These multi-layer neural networks with hidden layer were finally the starting signal for deep learning.